Welcome to Big City, Small Town, the weekly podcast all about San Antonio and the people who make it go and grow. I'm your host, Bob Rivard. The nonprofit San Antonio Report, which my wife, Monica Mackley, and I founded in 2012, celebrated its 13th anniversary earlier this month. It was called the Rivard Report for many years, but the name was changed during the pandemic as I stepped down as editor and publisher. The report was an early city-based nonprofit news site in the beginning, with just a few other sites operating in other major U.S. cities. But with the continuing demise of print newspapers, hundreds of cities now look to independent nonprofit news sites to fill some of that gap in local news coverage. Our guests today are publisher Angie and editor-in-chief Leigh Munsil. Angie and Leigh, welcome to Big City, Small Town.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So happy anniversary.
Thank you. Let's just start by saying we wouldn't be celebrating this momentous anniversary if it were not for you and Monica. So we have a huge debt of gratitude. The whole city does.
Well, I told Monica this morning that I was going to look right in the camera and say thank you to all the donors who made it possible and believed in our crazy idea in the beginning and have sustained the report and its staff ever since, 13 years, which is remarkable when you think about it, that something that was started with so little other than a vision and a dream, really, and now look at it today. And people rely on it and count on it and may not be aware that it's been there for 13 years.
Yeah, you and Monica were definitely trailblazers in the nonprofit space in journalism. I believe at the time you started it, like you said, there were maybe 30 nonprofit news organizations in the country. There are over 450 nonprofit news organizations in the U.S. now, which is pretty remarkable in that amount of time. So the model is proving itself.
Well, we're in the fastest growing city in the country. Or maybe next year Austin will be fastest and we'll be second, but that's
a lot.
That's what we're seeing in the San Antonio-Austin corridor. And yet U.S. newspapers continue to decline. Leigh, I know you're going to the Poynter Think Tank Institute in St. Petersburg, and there's a lot of hand-wringing over that. But every year there's fewer journalists. And when you look at a city the size of San Antonio that's growing, and I'm talking about the multi-county area around it that you serve, it's a huge responsibility, and every journalist counts. And so the report is playing a key role and will continue to do that, I hope, in the coming years. And there's lots to talk about. Let's start with the mayor's race, because yesterday you guys reported on the lottery drawing.
Yeah.
27 names on the ballot with no particular logic or reason to how they're going to be listed. By my calculus, Leigh, that's about 3 screens on the computer when people go into the booth to vote. And so they're going to have to go a long ways down to find number 25 through 27 or whatever it is on the last page.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating mayoral election for a lot of reasons. It's going to be on a Saturday in Fiesta. It's just going to be so important for voters to plan ahead, to know who they're interested in voting for and know where they are on the ballot. Do that kind of pre-work. We have a voter guide coming out here pretty soon with information about candidates. We have Q&As out in the field, and I know you're doing a Q&A as well. And all of this serves to help the community of San Antonio be more informed and prepared as they go into that ballot box to choose the first time we've had an open mayoral race in a really long time. So it's going to be a big moment for the city, and being prepared for voters is going to be really essential.
Last week, Andrea Druch, your political reporter, also did an article on how little it takes to get onto the ballot in the city of San Antonio. Basically $100, and I think no felonies. That's pretty much
what a bar.
That's all of us. And in my opinion, and I know you guys don't editorialize, but in my opinion, that's making it exceedingly and unreasonably difficult for all but the most committed voters, because they're going to see 27 names, most of them unfamiliar, and it is going to require a lot to ask voters to go through multiple pages on the computer screen just to see the mayoral candidates, much less city council candidates or whatever issues happen to be on that ballot. And we do editorialize here and believe that it's an urgent priority for the city, the new mayor, the new council, when they're seated, to push for a charter reform to change the nature of the of the process, so that fewer people, only legitimate candidates, if it's possible, appear on future ballots.
Yeah, and Andrea worked really hard on that piece, and it was something that we'd been meaning to get to forever. In fact, Wendy Cook, our managing editor from a few years ago, had long been talking about how this was unique in San Antonio. If you look at Texas cities, if you look at cities across the country, either they have a signature threshold, and you can get on the San Antonio ballot with signatures. This year, Andrea checked with the city clerk. None of them did. They all just paid because the bar is so low money-wise. So all that to say, this is unique in San Antonio. It's worth pointing out, and you're allowed to have an opinion. We really just want to point out instances like that where we think that there's something that the public should be aware of, and that was the point of that piece, was to raise that issue. And I think Andrea did a great job with the reporting on it, and she even kind of factored in, talking to the city clerk, what inflation would be, and it was, I think the $600-$700 range. It would be, if you had counted for inflation since 1974, I believe, which was when that $100 mark was set, and it was discussed in the charter review last year when the city looked at changing the charter, whether or not they would change that threshold, and they ultimately decided not to.
I would say they buckled, but there's another editorial position. I like the fact that Andrea talked about the city of Houston charges a little over $1,000, and they don't have the ballot problem we have. So there's the solution right there. And if people want to be critical and say that you're excluding certain people from campaigning, if you can't raise $1,000, you can't campaign. So we're not excluding anybody.
And the number of signatures, if you don't want to pay the fee and just go out and collect signatures, the number of signatures was very, very small. It's a percentage of turnout. I believe in the last election, it was super complicated, so we didn't even really get into all of it all in the story. But in some cases, it was tens of signatures, not hundreds.
Well, in other news of importance and interest, and of course, this podcast releases on Friday morning, but it's being previously recorded, so we don't know exactly what's going to take place at City Council. But the Bexar County Commissioners and Bexar County Judge Peter Sakai are appearing before City Council, and they're discussing Project Marvel and what the county or city might do or not do in the way of funding and accelerating that project to bring the Spurs back from the east side downtown to Hemisphere, to fund expansion of the Alamo Dome and the Convention Center, and build a land bridge over I-37. How are you guys going to cover that?
Well, I would just be remiss if I didn't say go to sanantonioreport.org. We will have this story up on the website by the time this podcast posts. But we have a really great team of reporters, as you mentioned. Andrea Drush, just excellent political reporter. Sherry Bidiger is probably a byline that your followers know,
Sure.
Already have read a lot of her work. She covers development for us. Development is a big piece of this Project Marvel question and story. And so, in fact, we've meant to do some more huddling between the two of them to talk about, okay, who takes what when Project Marvel stuff bubbles up, because there's just so much to cover with this story. And it's a city-shaping project, right? It's going to be hugely influential in the future of the city. How it happens, whether it happens, where the money comes from, all of this stuff is going to be one of the biggest stories, if not the biggest story for San Antonio over the next 5-10 years and on. And the Spurs is such a big piece of the city's identity, such a big piece of its history. And when you talk about development, as people gather around something like the Spurs, it helps spur, sorry for the pun, economic investment in areas of the city. And so it's a really interesting story, and we've been covering it. We're going to keep covering it, and looking for ways to add value. Explaining it well to the audience, I think, is really important. Even the most versed of San Antonio news readers still occasionally need an explainer on something, including Project Marvel. I think even if you've been reading about it, every once in a while you need that step back. Okay, what's actually happening here? What are we talking about? Who's on which side of this? Bexar County Judge Peter Sakai kind of putting up the brakes and saying we need more transparency about that. That was a big moment in the Project Marvel saga, and there's just a lot of coverage that we're going to keep doing. But yeah, go to our website. There will be coverage up by the time this posts, and we'll continue to cover the story.
It does seem like we're at the stage now in Project Marvel where it's becoming a public conversation rather than behind closed doors, and that the public financing of sports arenas and stadiums is always a controversial ballot issue around the state and around the country. And some cities have done it one way with largely public funding. Other sports franchise owners have, funded the arenas from their own deep pockets. And I think we're looking in San Antonio for some combination of private and public funding, but we haven't heard numbers yet. And hopefully we'll hear numbers very soon. When I think about the Spurs and the San Antonio report, I can't help but think about the fact you guys hired one of the most celebrated sports voices for many years in our city, Ken Rodriguez, who originally came back to his hometown. He was a Jefferson High School product, and he was at the Miami Herald when he became an Express News sports columnist, and he's been freelancing for the report for many years, but now he's on staff.
Yeah. Ken just joined us a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And on a new beat that we're really excited about, it's a culinary features beat, features writer. The idea being that, we're always going to do the news that San Antonians value. We're always going to go deep on the news that San Antonians value. However, we also want to add in more of this lifestyle coverage that brings people in the door, also helps them be more informed, and not just, 10 restaurants opening in San Antonio next week. It's the ideas of the people behind the restaurants, and the whole food industry. It's a huge portion of our economy. It's a business story. It's a labor story. It's a features people story. I think Ken is great at just telling those stories of people behind ventures. And I think there's an entrepreneurial spirit in San Antonio that is worth paying attention to and telling great stories.
Well, he already surprised me with a story last week about the Facebook page. I think it's called the San Antonio Restaurant Group.
Yeah.
I was stunned by that guy's reach, and I had never heard of it. I consider myself sort of a foodie, but had never heard of it or the influence that individual or he and his partner have on the professional restaurant scene. So he'll bring a fresh eye. What I wonder is whether you're going to let him out of the corral and write about sports.
Not anytime soon, probably.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Once somebody,
eventually,
each of our reporters has, interests and stuff that they're good at covering that might be a little bit off their beat. Ken is certainly one of those, but we're super excited about culinary, and he's really excited about culinary. There's a lot of good stories to tell. So, maybe at some point there will be sports stuff to cover, and there's a lot going on with the Spurs. But keep in mind, when we cover sports, because we don't necessarily cover the game story every day, it's features coverage as well. It's the people behind the games, the same way it's the people behind the restaurants. There's really a common thread between all of that coverage.
Yeah, Ken is a long desired addition to our team. I think, as you know, I think you would have loved to.
Oh, many times we rang his bell. But...
Exactly. So the timing just is perfect for us to bring him on board. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and to have him on the team is just we're just super excited. And he does have quite a gift for telling a story from a very human perspective. And we think, digital audiences tend to be a little bit older, and we think his storytelling is going to open up some new readers for us as they flock to his work.
Yeah, Ken had a great second career with Our Lady of the Lake University in the higher education space, but now that he's back in journalism, that's great. And you could actually go into your own archive and do the best of Ken Rodriguez over the years, because it's one memorable story after another that he's just a gifted writer, and
he really is.
He should have never gotten away from San Antonio, but we got him back, and that's a good story. Leigh, how much Texas Tribune will you publish over the course of the legislative session? Because public school funding is in the balance. There's a very controversial voucher bill that the governor's pushing hard on an emergency basis. And, there's just a number of other issues that are of keen interest to people right now for the next 5 months.
Yeah, there's tons going on in the state legislature. I think we have long had as you mentioned, partnership with Texas Tribune, and they make their coverage available for local newsrooms to use. We'll do some of that. We also have an awesome team on staff helping us make sense of those statewide issues for a local audience, particularly, as you mentioned, Andrea Dresch covers politics. In fact, it's hard to find a Trib story lately that she hasn't already gotten to in some way, which is a great problem to have. And she certainly has a good sense of the Texas legislature and how it affects local issues. We're also sending her for the first time to SA to DC to do that kind of, you didn't mention this yet, but I know you're going to get to it, like federal changes and what that means for San Antonio. Huge story for us. I feel like we've been national politics reporters over the past 3 weeks, not by any choice of ours, but just because there are so many federal policies changing so quickly that affect so many people in our community that if you're covering local news, right, you're touching on those issues. But either when you cover those sorts of stories, you need to be so comprehensive that it tells a reader everything they need to know, or you need to be so specific about someone who's affected by a policy that it adds some value to the conversation. I think what you need to not do as a reporter, and I talk to staff about this a lot, especially when there's kind of federal things changing or state things changing, is cherry pick a couple examples and put it together to say this says something for San Antonio. Some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. But these are the reporting challenges that are a lot of fun. On education also, we have a new education reporter, Xochitl Garcia, and she's been excellent so far. In fact, she's only gotten up and running in the past couple of weeks, but we have her working this week. Probably by the time this launches, we'll have it out on a education savings account or vouchers explainer, which is just going to be, the basics of how much money we're talking about, like by the numbers really is the way to put it, what it means for parents, how it compares to the basic allotment, like what it means for San Antonians specifically, if Senate Bill 2 were to pass as it currently is written, it's passed, but if the House version ends up looking like the Senate version. But again, we're trying to add some value for the local community on these stories, as well as pull from Texas Tribune when there's something to publish.
And we're going to be doubling our education reporting very, very soon.
Yeah.
How so?
We are adding a higher education reporter. As you well know, with 17 or 18 independent school districts in Bexar County, you've got a lot to cover.
That's a full-time
from
job.
K through 12. It is a very full-time job.
Pre-K through 12, Angie.
Pre-K through 12, you're correct. And so we've been working with this organization called Open Campus, a national nonprofit, to help stand up higher ed reporting across the country. They're specifically interested in Texas. And so we're in the process of interviewing candidates for our first ever dedicated higher ed reporter. And then on April the 1st, we'll be having what you founded. And this is going to shock you, I think. It will be the 10th annual San Antonio Regional Education Forum on
terrific.
April 1.
And who's coming to that?
We are incredibly excited. We're going to be having the recently departed 12th United States Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, is going to be with us for our 10th annual. And we think he's a great selection, like Leigh said, with everything that's happening in Texas. There's a lot to talk about. And he has a very recent perspective on what's happening across the country.
He can tell us whether there's going to be an education department going.
Well, wouldn't that
future.
be spicy?
You mentioned Xochitl Garcia, the new education reporter. I've been accused fairly of being so pro-UTSA. I should mention she's an A&M San Antonio graduate.
She is our first.
Is she a homie from San Antonio, and did she go to public schools, or where she's from?
She did go to public schools in the Houston area.
Okay.
She was one of the first sort of non-traditional A&M San Antonio students.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because she came and she decided to go there. And when I was interviewing her, she said, I said, "So did you live in the dorm?" And she said, "Well, we didn't even have dorms at first. We had to live in hotels." So we're just super happy to have her on board. Really hit the ground running.
Well, if Dr. Ochoa from Texas A&M San Antonio is listening, we need to have you on the podcast soon, Doctor, and level the playing field here among public institutions of higher education. We are at a inflection point in the city. Leigh, you mentioned all the national issues are local issues, whether they're immigration or so many different funding things we're looking at. I was at a leadership meeting last night in the city, and the room was filled with people that I know voted for President Trump and others that didn't, but they were all incredibly wary about funding for San Antonio, NASA funding for the Southwest Research Institute, National Institute of Health funding for Texas Biomed, funding for research at UT and UT Health, UT San Antonio and UT Health. Everybody's very worried about what's happening to funding Elon Musk and the Doge initiative in Washington right now. And yet people are very cautious about speaking about it publicly because there are heightened political sensitivities, and President Trump has made no secret of his fact of using the Justice Department and other federal authorities to go after people that are his critics or his adversaries. And people are very worried about exactly how to defend the public funding that we receive here in San Antonio. It's just vital. Tens of thousands of jobs are at risk here. And I'm just wondering how you're going to cover that, because it is very difficult to get people to speak about it publicly, but the level of anxiety is acute.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the key is not to get distracted by the chaos and anxiety, because everybody will tell you, about their anxiousness or what the chaos feels like. But again, being very specific on what is changing, where it's changing, who it affects. Again, the job of a journalist is to demystify complicated moments, to find what's actually going on and to tell the story of real people affected by policy changes. And I will just note that the interrogation of how to spend money the best possible way, that's a journalist's job as well. And so thoughtful interrogation of where and how money is spent is a reasonable role of a journalist, as well as talking about, these programs or efforts that are happening in the community, as you mentioned, like SWERI is a great example. I think Angie could speak to that as well, that they're doing unique work, research, important work, trying to tell the stories that are affecting those places in these moments. And again, I will just note, I came from Washington. I spent 10 years covering national politics news. In fact, I was in Washington covering politics during the last 4 years of the Trump administration. And so, several years ago, but I experienced it the first time. And there's certainly so much you could tell every day that it's easy to get kind of distracted by the, oh no, what's going to happen storyline. It just doesn't add a lot of value as a journalist to write the, oh no, what's going to happen storyline. It's to find out what's actually going to happen and then tell those stories as they happen. And I think we've already done some good work with that. And I think we'll keep doing that. But it crosses all beats. I mean, it's a business story. It's a development story. It's a research story. It's all the things that we cover. Politics, certainly, obviously. It's a workforce story. Sherry Bidiger and Raquel Torres did one on the work of migrant workers in San Antonio and what that means for our workforce, specifically if some of these immigration policies change in the way that the administration has been signaling. And so just really interesting stuff.
Well, you have only so many reporters.
Yeah. I would like double the amount of reporters that we have. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could double them, you'd want to double them again. I mean,
exactly.
It's the nature of editors to spend money wherever it's found. But, there's this blitzkrieg of executive orders that's emanating from Trump's White House. And so although we don't know the outcome in many cases, it is important to report what he's intending to do or what he's saying he's going to do, whether it turns out that way exactly or not.
Absolutely.
And I just wonder in the era we're in, where newspapers are declining and where there's been this, rapid increase in nonprofits, whether you look beyond the Texas Tribune and are there national nonprofits now that you can start to partner with to give people more original reporting out of Washington, just because almost every national story is becoming a story with local implications that people are quite consumed with.
Yeah, and partnerships is a big part of our, strategy for the future. I think journalists sometimes just put their heads down and do the job in front of them and trying to think strategically about who's a good partner and how to partner well with them to, as you said, get more great coverage in front of the audience, I think is a big part of what I like to do. Again, I have national experience and know a lot of people in those worlds. There certainly are opportunities to partner more on that sort of coverage. But I think this is a big moment also to buckle down. As you mentioned, we only have, 8 reporters for all of San Antonio. So we can't tell every story. So we need to decide where our time is best spent every day and which stories we can add value on for the San Antonio community. And I think our audience and hopefully members of your audience as well would agree that we do that. We do add a lot of value. Our stories are deep. People spend a lot of time on them, 2 minutes, 3 minutes sometimes on these stories, which are metrics I never saw when I was in Washington. People would read the headline, a couple paragraphs, and move on with their day. But here in San Antonio, we feel a huge responsibility at the San Antonio Report because we know people are reading every word of the stories that we write. And that's a big responsibility, big opportunity also to help inform our community as best we can.
But to your point, the way more collaboration, more potential combination is probably long-term something that's going to happen in the journalism world.
Yeah, it was always the strength of daily newspapers that they were able to draw on syndications and news services and others to give people that complete sort of global report.
Right.
Some people, read the paper for local news, and some were much more interested in the world around them. And it just seems like there's enough nonprofits operating at the national level now that you could offer people even more content on the site. But I notice, I don't know very much about it, but I see more and more reporters are funded by an entity called Report for America. And I think it's some sort of arrangement where they pay half of the salary to the entity for a while, and then the impetus is on the organization to hire the reporter after a couple of years or something. I wonder if have you looked at that or
we've
anything
looked
like
at
that?
it. We just haven't found the right opportunity for it, and it's not quite half. And there's living expenses and stuff like that. That it ends up being a little bit more of a heavy lift than it appears to be at first. But we definitely would love to do it at some point. We have pretty robust internship programs, as you know, and we're really, Leigh and the team, and we all are really committed to helping train up the next generation of reporters, and so definitely it was something we would like to do.
With your limited reporters, I wonder how you do make some of those choices, Leigh. I'm a downtown inner city guy, but I have to tell you, yesterday I found myself in Stone Oak and got on the apps, and it said to go 6 miles from 281 and 1604 to 1604 and I-10 would take 40 minutes. 6 miles. 40 minutes.
Yeah.
A red line from one end to the other because of the expansion that's going on. And of course, I could have turned the other way to 1604 and I-35 if I had been going that way and encountered the same thing. So we have TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation. It's called that, but it's really the Texas Department of Highways. It's constitutionally mandated to spend 95% of its funds on highway expansion and roads. And it's decidedly anti-mass transit at the state level. People here are clamoring for some sort of mobility solution to the I-35 corridor from here to Austin. And now that we're expanding 1604, you're looking at these multi-year projects and the economic impact of making people spend 40 minutes in their car to go 6 miles, much less their longer commute. I don't think anybody's measuring it, but it's palpable. And when I just sort of casually mentioned that to people, you would have thought I was talking about a death in the family. Everybody came around me saying, oh, you need to hear my story. And everybody was moaning and groaning, particularly people that live and work out in that part of the city. And I wonder whether or not, is that a story for the report, or it's just too much to get your arms around?
We've done all sorts of stuff on infrastructure in this moment in infrastructure, what it means for San Antonio. I think occasionally on stories like this, we did for City Fest 2 years ago, we did a future of transportation infrastructure like panel event, which was a virtual event. Andrea moderated that one. And, we talked about the airport. We talked about freeways, all of those things. It's hard to get TxDOT to appear on a panel, by the way, if you would like to help me with that.
I don't think I can be any help.
We would always love to have more, communication from TxDOT on things. Although I did hear a TxDOT official say not to us, to someone else in the past, year or so that construction on the freeways is just going to be the experience of Texas drivers between now and forever, basically our entire lifetimes, which is a fascinating thing to come out and say. And also, I think speaks to this moment. You started this podcast talking about San Antonio's major growth, right? That's a challenge of growth. And as you start to do the projects are happening. There is some light at the end of the tunnel on things like the various corridors. I-35 is going to go up onto a second level, which is going to be fascinating. There's lots going on, and we're going to keep covering those stories as one-offs and also stepping back and having conversations when necessary.
We've tentatively slated for the second half of the year an event around infrastructure to include
That's
TxDOT.
a good idea.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think we're at the point in the city where our growth is so inexorable. Get used to it. It's not changing. I think the city bond projects to improve roadways and other key infrastructure is from 2017 on has been unprecedented in the amount of projects going on, and that's not going to change. It's going to accelerate in the 2027 bond when we finally get around to that. And I think the state projects, they're here to stay, and we're just it's the growing pains of being such a fast growing city.
Absolutely, but I would also note this is a big part of why I came here, right? If you look at the demographic trends of...
You love traffic.
Yeah, big fan of traffic. No, but if you look at the demographic trends of the nation, Texas cities are the future of the nation. The demographics of Texas cities are going to be the voting demographics of this nation 10 years from now, partly because of the growth in the Hispanic community, how that's affecting the whole national political landscape is fascinating to me. I did 10 years in national politics, and San Antonio is the future. And how we solve problems like growth have implications for the whole nation. And so, let's tell great local stories because it means something. To manage growth well in a community like San Antonio means something, as it has implications for others.
Well, let's find some ways to get you some more reporters, Angie. We've spoken for a half an hour about editorial content, but let's talk about how challenging it is to run a nonprofit in the post-COVID era that we're all living in.
You nailed it. It's challenging. We've even recently reported on some of the challenges that the nonprofit community has had coming out of COVID when there were employee retention tax credits and other types of funding that helped us all get through that very, very difficult time. And those don't exist anymore. And so it's really hit a lot of nonprofits hard. We're no exception to that. And then you tack on top of that, what's happening in media across the country, lack of trust. And that's why we work so hard every single day to make sure that we're building trust in our readership. Active news avoidance is like a real thing. So we are constantly making sure that we're doing everything to keep readers and attract new readers. But, it comes down to funding. And the beautiful thing about the nonprofit model is that you're not taking any profits and distributing those to, shareholders or bonus plans and things like that. If you have something left over at the end of the year, which we often don't, but if you do, you invest in the nonprofit model, you invest that back in the journalism. And over time, that's what you did, and that's what we continue to do. But the fact is, donors in San Antonio, they give to schools, public schools, places of worship. They give to the arts, social service organizations.
Cats and dogs.
Healthcare. So what we have increasingly have to do is persuade more people like big philanthropists, but also just your everyday giver, that investing in local nonprofit news is just as important to the vitality of our community as investing in schools, churches, cats, and dogs.
I heard one national political pundit, Leigh, say yesterday on an NPR program that people don't know what they've got until it's gone, Absolutely. Quoting the famous
Yeah.
rock song. And I think that's the case sometimes, that people do take for granted. The report's been around for 13 years, and some people just think, ho-hum, it's there and it's free, and I rely on it, or I'm subscribed to the newsletter. But you sort of have to be in the business of constantly reminding people that every dollar counts.
Every dollar does count. It counts a lot. And like I said, with this model, we're not beholden to, major advertisers. And it only works if you have a broad base of community support. That's the only way this model works. And like you said, after 13 years, we're sometimes taken for granted that, well, they're always there. Somebody's going to make sure that the San Antonio Report is there every morning to publish what's happening in depth in our community. And I would just say I wouldn't take that for granted with what's happening across the country in journalism. No one should take that for granted.
And I think this should resonate with listeners, partly because of everything that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, with the changes in the industry, with newsrooms going away. Live in a news desert for a little bit, and you start to realize how much you appreciate your local newsroom, right? I think our country has more familiarity now with what it looks like when communities don't have strong local coverage, and therefore there is appetite and desire to see newsrooms like the San Antonio Report thrive in a community like San Antonio that deserves great coverage that's available to everyone. We don't have a paywall, and that's a big part of what makes us special, and we think that that's important.
Our good friend, our mutual good friend, Chico Newman, says it this way, and he's so right. If the San Antonio Report did not exist today, had you not started this, converted it to a nonprofit, we wouldn't be asking for $10,000 or, $3,000 gifts. We'd be out trying to start what this community benefits from every single day. Local quality, in-depth local news. We'd be trying to start this thing. And, that's exactly what's happening in cities where newspapers are not, have gone away, or not performing in the way that they used to. So the Fort Worth Report, we helped stand up. The Houston Landing, the Nashville Banner, all these cities are having to raise millions of dollars to create what we have in this city today that we never raised that kind of money for.
When I don't remember the exact number, but when we first started, we not only were appealing to the Chico Newmans and Graham Westons and Charles Butts and the other major philanthropists of the city, and they responded in an extraordinary way. But we were trying to get the millennial generation, and we were very successful in getting them both as readers and as members, supporting members. And I'll say that being a member doesn't mean when you read us, you're a member. You've got to write a check, or in the world we live in today, Zelle us or Cash App us or give us, a monthly. But I think our initial membership for individuals was as low as $35 or $50 a year at the time. This would be 2012 or 13 or whatever it was. What is it today if somebody wants to get in the bottom? There's actually no
minimum. You can join for $5 a month, or you can join for $150 a month, or whatever. We want this news to be available to all. But we certainly rely on, the community to keep us going each and every day, and to be able to staff at the level of 8 reporters and hopefully grow that, over time.
And I like to say, if you can pay for Netflix, you can pay for news, right? Like those subscription services keep going up, and they keep adding it back in commercials after you've already been a subscriber however long. That one's for Amazon. But for real though, this is something that if you value, support it. And you can start by just becoming a newsletter subscriber. If you don't subscribe to our newsletters, top right corner of our website, sanantonioreport.org, you can become a member right there. You can also subscribe to our newsletters. And don't worry, we will ask you in our newsletters to become a member very shortly, because that's how we do this, is we do great work. We get it in front of the audience, and then we say, we need your help to support this. And it's slow going sometimes to make that case, but I think it's something that the community continues to support because it is important to have this resource in San Antonio.
And one thing that is happening in the community, the San Antonio Area Foundation last year designated themselves as a press forward chapter, if you will. And so they've been going through the process of doing research on news deserts, just anything about news, not just in Bexar County, but in surrounding counties. And they're about to come out and publish that research. And then we'll be convening through the Area Foundation folks to talk about, the reality of what is happening with news in the area. So we're hopeful that that will really garner the attention of a lot of people.
Well, we've long hoped the San Antonio Area Foundation would become a major funder, and we've seen other organizations like the Houston Endowment invest millions of dollars in the Houston Landing, for example, among other major philanthropic donors. And I hope that happens because it's an investment for the whole city. We're just about out of time, but I want to ask you before we go a question I'm asking a lot of people, which is, do people still work remotely at the report? Do you still allow that? Are you demanding everybody come back in? Where are you on this whole hybrid thing?
We think we've landed in a really good place. In fact, I dropped a bag off at the office this morning early, before the reason I was early here, and an editor and a reporter were already at their desk working away. So what we landed on was a hybrid work schedule. And of course, you know what it's like for a reporter. They're in and out, and a photographer. So obviously we're real flexible and just want people to be able to do their jobs. But we see the value of being together in that newsroom is really great. And you can really see it when it happens. There's more collaboration across reporters. There's more really in-depth, thoughtful editing. It just, and for the business team as well. So that's really working for us.
Well, it seems to me that the push that we're seeing now of everybody back in the office full time kind of ignores the fact that having the freedom to manage your day a little bit better is really actually something, if you are a self-starter, it increases your productivity. On the other hand, if you're all working remotely, you miss that collaborative spirit that you can only get by people being in. So some sort of medium seems to be the answer to that. Do you have a policy with a firm formula, like 3 days a week or 4 days a week?
Yeah, so our stated policy is 3 days in the week. You work as the office as your home base. But yeah, 3 days a week is what we all do, and we all enjoy it. And
yeah. Well, and as Angie mentioned, reporter life is a little bit different. You're coming and going, you're out at assignments, and photojournalists as well. They're kind of our front lines of shaking hands, meeting the community. Their days in the office don't have to look the same as like an editor day in the office. Although, like you said, there's something special about a newsroom. Again, it's a big part of why I was interested in doing this in this way in Texas. Like, if you look at our top stories for 2024, many of them have two bylines on them, those dual byline stories where two journalists from different perspectives who cover different beats team up and look across each other's beats and see something in the other's beat that they could perhaps extrapolate on based on their sourcing and understanding of politics and development, for example, like when Sherry and Andrea work together. That story has kind of a special sauce to it because it's greater than the sum of its parts. And so those things only happen with some level of in-person interaction.
Well, I think we've had a good opportunity here at the 13th anniversary to talk about the importance of the San Antonio Report to the community. I was really touched when the report's original first reporter, Iris Dimmick, who's moved on to the Haven for Hope, where she'll do great work, was at a city council meeting where they actually paused the official business to extol her impact as a journalist on the local community. And that was incredibly flattering. I've never seen that happen for anybody else. And I just think it's a testimony to the value that people put in the report and the people that have worked there.
It's proof that journalism is an essential service for the public good.
With that, we'll close. Thanks for coming on to Big City, Small Town. Angie Mock and Leigh Munsil, San Antonio Report.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please share this episode with friends and colleagues, and do sign up for our new newsletter, Monday Musings. Big City, Small Town is brought to you by Western Urban, building the city our children want to call home, and Geekdom, where startups are born and smart ideas become businesses. Our producer is Corey Ames, video by Erica Rempel, sound engineering by Alfie De La Garza of Sound Crane Audio. We will see you next week.